I got welcome everybody. Welcome back. Sorry, I got taken by surprise there. I went live quicker than I thought I was going to. Welcome everybody to the Take a Stand live event where I'm interviewing 35 incredible women who are inspiring. They are sharing their stories of triumph over trauma in the hope that you can see that there is light at the end of the tunnel. If you're going through something and you are struggling, we want you to know that there is hope and there is light at the end of the tunnel. As myself, Diana, having a really personal conversation, sometimes this can be a little bit triggering for people. The emotions bubble to the surface. I just want you to be mindful of that and to have a conversation with your friends, if not your family, if not, reach out to your doctor. And if you're feeling that you are at a point of emotional crisis, just pop yourself down to A&E. I have done it in the past. There's no shame in it. It's part of reaching out for help, is part of the recovery and healing journey. So I just want to welcome people again from YouTube. It's great to have you here. If you're new to the channel, please do consider subscribing. The channel is all about living life trauma free. You know, click the notification bell. And if you can think of someone in your network who this would be a good opportunity to listen to our conversation, then please do pass this recording on. So welcome, Diana.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for inviting me.
And first things first, I'd like to, first things first, before we get into the conversation, is I'd like to ask you about your book, because I think this is how we first came across one another.
Yeah. Oh, so my book that I managed to, it took me many years to write. A book of sort of in a year or whatever. My book was bubbling for a long time, but I published in June, and it's called Both Sides of the Track. I've got a copy here, as you say. Cool. And it's about my experiences of being on both sides of the care system. So the care system being the track. So it's about my experiences of being a child in care, what happened to me then, obviously the traumas that I experienced, and then the other side is of my experience of being a child protection social worker, which I have been for the last 17 years. So it's just marries that together and sort of culminates in my strategies that I cultivated over the years to overcome trauma and achieve success, and personal success and professional success. That's it in a nutshell.
Isn't that interesting that you were in care, I was in care, you worked in social services or are still working in social services. I worked in social services for 20 years. Isn't that weird?
It's a coincidence or not.
Yeah.
I think those that walked the road or lived the path actually probably are the best people, in my opinion, to kind of work in. Obviously, we need lots of different people in the services, but I think, you know, there's a different level of empathy that comes from people that actually have lived through experiences that we have.
I think we actually see it really differently.
For sure.
My experience was that I saw it very differently to my peers who were around me at the time, which is interesting. I always found, I'll digress a little bit first. I always found that the team that I was working with, a lot of people would be highly stressed and just couldn't get their head around certain things, where for me it just seemed like that was life, that was normal, that was how it was. Doesn't make it right.
No.
But I just seem to go,
tolerance, isn't there? There's a level of insight and a level of tolerance, whereas some people are really shocked by experiences that perhaps people like us are not so shocked because we've lived it.
Yeah.
Which is a sad thing to say, but it is true.
That's a great point. So let's get into then, because I digressed a little bit. But of course, it's just because we have so much in common. I can't help myself. I'd love to hear a little bit about your story of triumph over trauma.
Okay. So I'm going to try and just, keep it short because, we could go into the whole story, and that would and that's not what we're here for, really. But and I've listened to a few of the conversations that you've had over the week as much as I could, and it's been wonderful to listen to different women's stories. And it's all about trauma, but there's so much difference there as well. So I found that really, really encouraging and inspiring. And I'm going to go back and listen to them all over the weekend. But my story really, essentially, as I said, I was a child in care, but it began way before that. My parents clearly struggled to look after me and my brother. They separated when I was very young. I was about 2. That was a missed sort of, a lot of neglect, domestic abuse, and my mum's own mental health difficulties. She struggled on. My dad left us in the care of my mum, and sadly she could not cope, and she left me and my brother on Christmas Eve in 1974, and I was 4, my brother was 6, and as you can imagine, that was the beginning, or one of the most significant traumatic events in my life. We went into care, and in those days, foster care wasn't as prevalent as it is now, and it wasn't the way that social services worked with young people and children in our situation. So we went into a children's home, which today that wouldn't happen, thankfully, but we did. The first children's home we went into was okay, to be fair. They looked after us pretty as best as they could. I was very young. And my brother had a lot more problems than me because of what we'd been through previously. But I kind of was okay in that particular children's home. But, we was only there for about 18 months, and it was decided that they would give my dad a chance, because he did want to try, and he did try. He failed miserably, bless him. I've moved on from all of that, but he tried. So we were placed in his care sort of about 18 months later. I was about 5.5. But as I say, he failed catastrophically, and we were removed from his care when I was 7, and we went back into a children's home. So this children's home was very, very different. It's the infamous St Leonard's Children's Home. Maybe some of the watchers won't know that, but it is fairly infamous for all of its trauma that it perpetrated. So within that children's home, I was separated from my brother and suffered horrific sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional harm, neglect, and that's from the people that are meant to look after us. So, you kind of understand that, parents, for all their reasons, fail and they can't look after their children. But when you're placed within the local authority, it's their job to look after you and keep you safe. And actually, that was very different. That was the worst. That was where I suffered the most significant harm, actually, as I say. That led, I've detailed all of that in the book, and as I say, I've gone into detail, but I've also tried to be mindful of, not being graphic, because nobody really wants to hear all of that and see all of that. But I had to be as candid as I could in order to, portray what had actually happened. That led to a very turbulent adolescence, for want of better words. That was characterized with sexual exploitation, a suicide attempt, and culminating really in me becoming a teenage parent with my son. I was pregnant at 17, and I had him just as I turned 18, with no skills to be a parent, because I had no parenting, and I was also suffering, obviously, extreme post-traumatic stress, which I didn't even know that at the time. That came later. But he was a bit of a turning point, bless him. He's 34 now, coming up for 35. He was a turning point in my life, and I do credit him with actually saving my life and giving me the strength to want to survive and want to make a change in my life. So I had him. There was a few incidents of trauma following his birth. I did enter a relationship that was domestic abuse, which was, took me to a point where I know that for him and me, he was about 2, 3. For him and me, that I had to make a significant change to my life. I was only 21 at the time, but I knew that I had to make a significant change to my life. Otherwise, he wasn't going to survive, and I wasn't going to survive. And it was, as I say, he gave me that strength to say, no, enough is enough. And it was at that point I decided that I needed an education, because I'd left school at 15 in a cloud of dust. didn't even think that I needed any qualifications. School meant nothing to me during my formative years because I was dealing with so much that I was dealing with. But clearly I was a bright child, but I just didn't focus on education. So I had no qualifications. One of my saving graces was reading. Read from very early on and was one of my escape, and still is now. So then I decided that I needed an education. So I went to college and I got my GCSEs and did an access course. And then I met my partner, not my current partner, but my daughter's father. And that was a good relationship in the beginning, in the early years, and he was a good influence on my son. And then it led to me having my daughter. I was able to progress through college. And then start university. And I actually felt at that point I had probably conquered a lot of my demons. And although I hadn't resolved all the trauma, I felt that I'd more or less come to terms with it. Little did I know. But what I realise now when I look back on that, is I'd learned very successfully how to compartmentalise trauma. So I knew how to keep things in a box and not look at them and only look at them. But that's not a strategy. It's not a successful strategy if you want to actually heal. All it does is keep a lid on things. And if something triggers it, then it'll all come out and then you're back to square one. So as much as I was making progress, I wasn't at the point where I am now, where I've resolved my trauma, healed, and I'm making significant progress. But anyway, I went to university, and it was at that point that this is where another turning point happened. And I met a young woman on the same course that I was on that had been in the same children's home, St. Leonard's, that I'd been in. And we were like blown away that, coincidence that, I'd even taken a year out to even have my daughter and then go back to university. So, the chances of us meeting, it was absolutely destiny and absolutely fate. But we met, and it all came tumbling out. She was she was a big support to me when she was a little bit older than me, a few years older than me when we were in, she still is, but when we were in the children's home, that made quite a bit of a difference because she was like a bit of an older sister. We never shared what happened. None of us did. That's, and I've seen that. I've heard that a lot in my work, even over this last week, listening to some of your the women that have been on the conference. And it is very strange why you don't sort of share these things when you're in it. But I mean, that's how perpetrators sort of manipulate and groom, and it works that way to orchestrate that. But, we did share. As soon as we met each other at university, it all came tumbling out. I told her what happened to me. She told me what happened to her. We were like, no, wait, we're not letting them get away with this. And so we went to the police. And that was around sort of 1998, 1999. At the time, the police listened to our story and they said, yes, they believed us. And yes, they would like to try to do something about it. But there wasn't a lot of evidence, so they left it at that point. And then sadly, about a year or two, it was about a year later, a young person that had also been in the children's home had killed himself, and he had also made a number of complaints. And then what transpired is that there was a lot of people making complaints about the same individuals, about the same children's home, and it was as a result of that there was a big police investigation called Operation Mapperton, and and that took a lot out of me, because going through the whole process of reliving the trauma, I became re-traumatized. And I had children, I was trying to study at university, and I just broke down. I couldn't cope, and it was that point that I kind of entered into real attempts at therapy. And then obviously we had the trial at the Old Bailey in 2001, and we did get some justice of some sorts. They went to prison and stuff, and not everyone. I mean, the person that abused me did go to prison for 14 years, but there were others that did clearly get away with it because of evidential sort of problems and whatever. So there was a justice of some sorts, and then I was left with, after the trial finished, I was left with like the fallout of it all. My relationship with my children's father had broken down. I was in therapy. My university degree was on hold. I'd deferred and I don't know. I just felt like actually everything that I'd worked so hard over the preceding years had fallen apart. But through the process of therapy, and I had an excellent therapist at the Tavistock, and I saw her on and off for about 10 years after that. And she was amazing. I mean, I credit her being my psychological mother, because she helped me really come to terms with so much of that trauma. And then, so, I picked myself up, finished my degree, my first degree, started working in the field of domestic abuse and mental health. And it got to a point where I thought, well, actually, if I'm actually going to make a difference and really help, because that was always going to be my focus and passion, that I wanted to work with children and families, and I knew I could do it, and I knew I had an aptitude for it, and I knew I had the empathy for it. But I just didn't want to work in statutory social services. I mean, I hated social services at that time. I was very angry still, and I felt that was not for me. But another coincidence, the charity that I was working for, we had to fold it in the end, the services that we were running, because we was like, the trauma of just funding to keep those services going became too much. So I was at a crossroads, and I was reading the paper one day, the Guardian, looking for my next sort of role in the field that I was working in, and there was a 2-page spread of Haringey Children's Services were growing their own social workers, and they were just coming out of Victoria Columbier, sadly, bless her, all of what had happened there. And they were really throwing a lot into trying to improve services and improve social work. And the carrot for me, reading that, was that they were paying people to do their master's degrees, and they were going to then pay for you to study and also work and then train you. So I really couldn't do a master's without being paid or about it being funded, because I had a family, I had commitments, financial commitments. So for me, it wasn't that I really wanted to be a social worker. I actually really wanted my master's degree. But I read in the process of that recruitment process, which was a really stringent recruitment process. I mean, there was something like 10 places for over 70 people applied for 10 places. In that process, I read the whole Lord Layman inquiry into the Victoria Columbier tragedy. And I read it, and it was like something like 493 pages. I read it back to back, and I read it again, and I was blown away by, the catastrophic failings and what happened to her. I mean, if I'd been fouled, she'd been fouled to the point of that she lost her life. She was murdered, and that you can't get any more than that. And then I became really passionate about becoming a social worker. Then I knew that was my calling, and I had to do it, and I was going to do it. And just because I'd been fouled by the system didn't mean that I was going to be a failure within it. So I did my master's, and the rest is history, really. I've worked across the services. Child protection is my passion. I'm very, very passionate about keeping children safe. Also passionate about, wherever possible, keeping children within their families, because care is no place for children, no matter, even if we've made phenomenal progress in terms of fostering and services and whatever, it's still pretty poor. The outcomes for children in care are poor. We know that. So for me, where possible, my passion is keeping children within their families. I don't work now within a statutory framework, or I do sort of. I'm an independent. I kind of work through it, or I went through the court teams, safeguarding, child protection, did them all, referral and assessment. Did really well as well. I mean, to be fair. But I also knew that it was also constricting me. So I knew that when I published my book, I would not be able to stay working as a statutory social worker. So I've left. I'm now an independent social worker, and I undertake parenting capacity assessments for different local authorities. And I also am about to become an independent visitor for NIAS. So that's working with children's homes, going visiting children in children's homes and assessing that situation there.
Oh, you'll be good at that. I think you'll be really good at that.
Thank you. Do stop me, Wendy, because I can talk for England, as you can tell. But yeah, and I'm also working on becoming a keynote speaker around my book, around my overall message, which is overcoming trauma and turning it into something good. And I'm also working on my coaching program, which is going to roll out in the new year. So I'm working on a one-to-one coaching program and a coaching course, which is called AnAID, 5 interconnected steps to empowerment, which is what
Lovely.
Yeah, so that's where I am at the minute.
Wow. What a journey. We've got, I mean, I didn't qualify as a social worker. I actually qualified as a youth and community worker, but worked within social services. So I worked with young people at risk, so care leavers I worked with, which I just loved. I absolutely loved it. And I also worked in placements for quite a long time as well. But in the end, I had to walk away. I completely burnt out. I kept re-traumatizing myself. And
it's secondary trauma, isn't it? It's secondary trauma as a result, and like compassion fatigue that you get from
there's so much secondary trauma in social services that isn't dealt with, isn't managed, isn't
lack of support for workers,
lack of support, bullying, the whole, it's actually quite a toxic. I found it quite, from my perspective, I actually found it quite a toxic environment.
I've had very good experiences. Very good experiences. I mean, I coming through the Victoria Columbia, obviously that being my passion to then train, I was with parents, so I went through the whole Peter Connolly trauma, and that was absolutely awful as a fledgling social worker coming out and then being targeted and vilified by the public for, and there's an excellent book by Professor Ray Jones that really puts that, really helps. It's helps people to have an informed position on what happened, because we can all have opinions, but you really need to understand the complexities of social work and the complexities of life and the complexities of all of that.
It's really complicated.
Very complicated. Yeah.
It's really, really complicated. But I ended up working in children's placements, and I just felt I became part of the system, and that there really wasn't a lot there wasn't a lot of positive influence that I could have. But I was really good at sniffing out really bad children's homes. I had a sixth sense. I had a sixth sense for it.
Yeah, and but I think our lives create that sixth sense. You had that there. I have that as well when I work with parents, and I kind of understand where changes can be made and where there is zero chance. I've developed that sixth sense myself, and around placements, and so yeah.
How have you managed to, because I don't think I did a particularly good job towards the end, it just all became a bit overwhelming. How have you managed to protect your own mental health when it's actually some of the situations would be very similar to what you experienced as a child or growing up within the care system?
I think, as I say, I had some excellent therapy for around 10 years, and I think that gave me a lot of strategies and skills to deal with my own trauma and how I reacted to that. And, so I think that I just sort of employed that alongside cultivating, as I said, the principles that I did have outlined in the book that I know that I didn't realize until I was really reaching the end of writing my book. But I realize now that over the years, somehow, thankfully, thank God, thank the universe, that I was able to implement and cultivate over the years to the point now where it's quite, I won't say easy for me, but I'm able to do that. So I can put that to different situations. So if I'm struggling with work, or I'm struggling in a personal situation or something like that, then I kind of have these strategies that I put into place, really. And that's that's what I'm incorporating into my coaching program. And my coaching program, while it is a business, I'm also going to be rolling it out to working with young people, children, care leavers, free, in a voluntary capacity, to give them the skills, because I think it's really important that for people like us that have come through it and can tell the story and can show that there's light at the end of the tunnel, we need to be able to give that to our young people. So I'm very, very keen to be able to roll out my program within that forum as well.
Yeah, that would be great. One thing I'm really passionate about is mentoring.
Yes,
I think mentoring is one of the best.
Me too.
It's just one of the best services. I think it's one that there is a different, I've seen a difference in how people respond to people who have been there, done that, had a similar
100%.
experience. They're more
100%.
prepared to listen, they can hear, which means that they're able to make changes. The trust is very different.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you said that. I'm going to do a PhD, my PhD, and my research area of study is about peer mentoring within child protection, because I don't understand why it's not implemented as much as what it should be and what it could be. And as you say, that trust, that relationship really, really works. And it works because people believe and trust that that person understands what they've been through, what they, what they need to overcome. And it just really, really works. So yeah, I'm going to be looking at that very much in a lot of detail for my PhD.
Oh wow, interesting. When do you do that? When does that start?
So the funny thing, it's not started yet. I want funding for it. And funny thing,
it'll turn up. Knowing your luck, it'll turn up.
Well, the funny thing is that as I just had an interview with a wonderful doctor just recently who's read my book, and she's a doctor within the Tavistock. She's a doctor of social work, and she runs the doctorate program for social work within the Tavistock. So she's encouraging me to look at that. As I say, I've got Professor Ray Jones who's encouraging me. I want him to be. Hope if he ever watches this, that he doesn't think I'm being too forward. But I would love him to be my supervisor for my PhD. So it's in the pipe.
Well, you can only ask, and it is amazing how many people say yes. Very few people say no to that type of thing.
Yeah.
Very few people say no.
My main thing is really sort of getting the book out, publicizing that, my independent work and my coaching. And then I hope within sort of like the next sort of 2 to 3 years, I would be in the position then to start my PhD, because that's a lot. It's a big commitment, and I wouldn't want to take that on now. I've got too much going on. Yeah.
So who is the book a good read for?
The book, actually, and I've had really good feedback, excuse me. It's for people that have been through trauma and adversity. And adversity covers so much, really. It doesn't have to be about child abuse and neglect and parental sort of dysfunction. It's about domestic abuse. It's so many different, as your conference has clearly shown. I mean, that's so interesting. So it's for anyone really that has struggled with those kind of issues, and it's a story about what happened to me, but essentially it's about how I've overcome it. It's also for people working within for social workers, trainee social workers, anyone working in the social care field. So I think it's got a wide audience, actually. I mean, everyone kept, when I was writing it was like, who's your audience? Who's your audience? And I really struggled, because actually I think my audience is a wide range. So it's for everybody, really. It's not a misery memoir either. I've been told, and I know that it's a challenging read in the beginning, because I have been so candid, and it is difficult. But once you get through it, and once you get to the other side, and you work through what I worked through, it's really inspiring. And I've been told that by many people, so I feel confident in saying that. But
yeah. Well, you've got great reviews.
Yeah.
I was looking at your reviews. I thought, she's got so many reviews.
And it's only just started, so I'm very grateful for that. Very, very grateful for the reviews, and I'm just looking forward to the future and writing more books and stuff. So, yeah.
What question? Knowing what you know now, what would you say to a young person coming through the care system, maybe a care leaver who's coming out the other side of being in care, has been in it for a while?
I think overall what I would say is, number one, love yourself, know your worth, be kind to yourself, and be your own parent, because most of us who come through that system, it's because our parents weren't able to be the parents that we needed them to be. So you're going to have to find a way to parent yourself healthily and lovingly, and that's not easily done, because then there's a lot of things you need to go through in order to be able to do that. But know your worth, love yourself, be kind to yourself. Don't never give up. Find your passion, find what you want to do, and go for it. you know, life is a short journey for, you know, it might be long, it might be short, but essentially, you know, if we're here for 100 years, we're lucky. You know, and many people go through so much trauma, significant trauma, much more than what, you know, I don't have the monopoly on it. You know, there's people out there, children now suffering much worse trauma. But, you know, the most important thing in that is to find whatever support you can, wherever you can. Find a dream, find a passion, go for it, and don't ever give up.
Yeah, it's really, really, really important. Don't ever give up. Because it can be way too easy to, when you come out the other side, you know, it's when you're going out into the big wide world and you haven't got the support that that you should have, you know, just keep your focus,
Find
keep
your
going.
tribe. Find your tribe.
Yeah.
Find people who can support you. There are people out there.
Yeah.
It's hard,
Yeah.
but find those people. Find those people.
Yeah. Ask people. I think it comes back to what you were saying about the mentoring earlier on, is that, you know, you've got someone in mind to be your mentor. Find a mentor. Find someone who you can ask for support from. And 99.9% of the time, people will say yes.
Yes. Yeah. Which is what I'd like to, you know, in terms of my coaching program, get that message out to as many young people as I can. And hopefully then that they will then continue that as well, because that's a message, isn't it? It's the message is a journey in itself. And I hope that when I'm not here, on this planet, that, you know, it continues, and the work that I've done so far, or what I've achieved, will continue and help people long after I'm gone.
Yeah.
Not going to be for a long while yet.
No, I'm gonna live forever. I don't know about you. I'm hanging on in for dear life, me.
I got so much
Memory
to do.
might not be, but I am.
Me too.
Diane, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thanks for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Take care. Good luck with it all. Take care. Bye.